There are 5 levels of intelligence. Most people never climb past the first. They live like pawns pieces on someone else's board, convinced they're making choices while someone else makes the rules. But intelligence isn't about IQ, grades, or how clever you sound. It's about control, the ability to shape reality before it shapes you. It's about seeing the invisible game of influence and learning how to play it consciously while everyone else moves on instinct. The higher you climb, the fewer you'll find beside you. Each level strips away illusions until only a handful reach the top, where you no longer compete in the game you design it. And once you see this ladder, you'll never unsee it. Because this isn't theory, it's how the world actually works. It decides who leads and who obeys, who shapes history and who becomes its forgotten footnote. Let's start from the bottom. Level 1. The pawn. You see them everywhere. At work, in classrooms, on the street, millions moving without thought, repeating what they've been told, chasing comfort and calling it freedom. The pawn's problem isn't stupidity, it's blindness. They live reactively, chained to routines that make them feel safe but keep them small. They mistake busyness for purpose, compliance for wisdom, comfort for success. They believe their opinions are original, but every idea they hold was implanted by parents, teachers, politicians, and algorithms. They obey rules they didn't write. They follow customs they never questioned. And they defend systems that quietly drain their potential, thinking it's all just the way things are. If you ask a pawn why they live the way they do, they'll say things like, "That's life," or "That's what everyone does." But those aren't reasons. They're excuses dressed as logic. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He wrote, "Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who deceives will always find those willing to be deceived." And that's the pawn governed by appearances, addicted to approval, terrified of being different. They nod when others nod. They fear what others fear. They follow trends, worship safety, and call it morality. Their greatest fear is not death. It's responsibility. Because once they admit they aren't powerless, they'd have to act. And action terrifies them. So they settle for obedience, for comfort, for invisibility. They become replaceable. They work, they consume, they die, and the world forgets their name by sunrise. But here's the good news. Awareness is the crack in the wall. The moment you see your chains, they start to loosen. Because seeing the game is the first step to playing it. And that's when you evolve. Level 2. The parrot. When a pawn wakes up, he becomes the parrot. The parrot isn't blind anymore. He's curious, eager, hungry to sound smart. He reads, quotes, posts, and repeats every wise idea he finds. He collects knowledge like feathers bright, colorful, and completely borrowed. He learns to speak intelligently, but not to think intelligently. He knows the language of depth without understanding the weight of it. You've seen him before. He talks about stoicism, psychology, philosophy, but every word he speaks comes from someone else. Every belief is second-hand. To most people, the parrot seems wise. But listen closer. There's no originality, no risk, no truth forged through experience. He's a performer, and like all performers, he depends on an audience. As Machiavelli said, everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. The parrot shines in appearances. He craves validation. He wants to seem enlightened, not be enlightened. This is where many intelligent people get trapped. They confuse imitation with evolution. They think collecting information equals growth, but parroting wisdom is not the same as living it. Still, this level is necessary. The parrot is learning, gathering, experimenting. He's starting to question the world around him, but he's still afraid to stand alone. He wants to be respected by the intelligent, but without paying the price of independent thought. So he memorizes instead of creates. He copies instead of builds. He wants applause more than truth. And that's the tragedy. He performs wisdom instead of applying it. He speaks of courage while fearing silence. He preaches confidence while depending on attention. But when the applause fades and imitation no longer satisfies, the parrot begins to crave something deeper. He starts asking a new question, not how can I sound smart, but how can I win? That's when cunning replaces mimicry. And from that cunning, the third form of intelligence begins to emerge. The fox. Level 3. The fox. This is where intelligence stops performing and starts playing. The fox is the first real strategist. While the pawn obeys and the parrot imitates, the fox calculates. He doesn't just react to life, he bends it. He reads people like maps. He listens for motives, not words. And he moves with surgical precision, 2 steps ahead of everyone who still believes in fairness. Machiavelli wrote, "One must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves." The fox has mastered the first half. He recognizes every trap, every agenda, every mask. He can sense deceit before it's spoken. He thrives in chaos because he creates it. He knows people reveal themselves through their fears and desires, and he turns that knowledge into leverage. He doesn't fight head-on. He misdirects, redirects, and lets others destroy themselves while thinking it was their own choice. To the world, the fox looks lucky, but his luck is engineered. He controls timing like an artist controls light, knowing exactly when to appear and when to vanish. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need to be liked. He only needs to win. Every conversation is a chess match. Every silence, a move. The fox's satisfaction doesn't come from praise, it comes from control. From knowing that people who underestimate him will never see the knife until it's already pressed against their ambitions. But for all his brilliance, the fox is still trapped in short-term victories. His power depends on constant motion, always scheming, always adjusting, always watching his back. Because cunning alone can't build stability. A fox can outsmart rivals today, but tomorrow requires another trick, another mask, another manipulation. It's exhausting, and when his tricks run out, his power collapses. Allies turn to enemies. Trust dissolves. His cleverness becomes his curse. Machiavelli warned of this exact danger. Clever men are admired, but they are rarely trusted. And trust is the one currency the fox can't counterfeit. Still, the fox is necessary. He's the disruptor, the innovator, the one who shakes systems awake. Without him, no game evolves. He teaches us that intelligence must act, not just analyze. But true mastery goes beyond outsmarting others. It requires shaping environments so that others act in your interest without realizing it. That's when intelligence becomes architecture, and those who make that leap become something else entirely. The Puppeteer. Level 4. The Puppeteer. The Puppeteer doesn't chase quick wins. He doesn't need to outwit people in every conversation. He builds systems mechanisms that work even when he's not in the room. Unlike the fox, who must constantly pull strings, the Puppeteer builds structures that pull themselves. He engineers choices, so people think they're acting freely, even when every option leads exactly where he wants. His art is invisible control. He influences how others think before they realize they're being influenced. He plants ideas like seeds, shaping decisions from the shadows. To the world, he's a friend, a mentor, a trusted voice. But behind that smile, every move serves a purpose. Every alliance, every word, every silence, it's all part of a long game. The puppeteer knows that raw power is fragile. What's durable is narrative. He doesn't fight for attention. He shapes the story everyone else is trying to fit into. He can start wars without firing a bullet, resolve them without lifting a finger, and shift entire groups with a single whispered phrase. And when chaos erupts, his hands appear clean, because others carry out his will, thinking it was their own idea. Machiavelli would have called this plausible deniability. The art of power without fingerprints, but there's a price. The puppeteer begins to lose himself in his own web. He wears too many masks, makes too many deals. Every friendship feels conditional, every alliance temporary. He trusts no one, not even himself. He collects loyalty like trophies but offers none in return. He becomes isolated powerful, yes, but hollow. Still, he's more evolved than the fox, because his intelligence isn't reactive, it's systemic. He doesn't just play the game, he shapes the field. And yet, he's still confined. For all his control, he's operating within someone else's world. He's manipulating the stage, but not building it. To reach the highest form of intelligence, he must do something rare. Step back. Detach from the performance. Stop playing roles and start writing the rules. This is where intelligence transcends manipulation and becomes creation. It's where vision replaces strategy. Where you no longer control people, you control the conditions that control people. The next level is not about dominance, it's about design. And those who reach it, few as they are, become the true architects of power. Level 5. The Architect. This is the summit, the final, rarest form of intelligence. The point where strategy dissolves into design, where you no longer play the game, you invent it. The architect doesn't chase recognition. He doesn't manipulate for short-term gain. He builds systems that live long after he's gone. He's not concerned with applause or enemies. He's concerned with permanence. His intelligence is not personal, it's architectural. He shapes structures that shape behavior. He creates institutions, traditions, technologies, and frameworks that govern entire generations. Where others seek influence, he seeks infrastructure. While the pawn obeys, the parrot imitates, the fox manipulates, and the puppeteer controls, the architect designs. He writes the laws the rest unconsciously follow. He defines the values people think they chose for themselves. This is the highest form of power, systemic immortality, a kind of presence that survives even when the creator's name fades from memory. You can see the architect's fingerprints everywhere, in nations that outlast their founders, in ideologies that still command loyalty centuries later, in brands, religions, or movements that continue to shape minds long after their creators have vanished. That's not luck, that's design. And that design is the purest form of intelligence Machiavelli ever hinted at. He knew that appearances can move crowds, but only systems endure. He knew that the clever fox and the manipulative puppeteer eventually fall, because their power dies with them. But the architect's power becomes invisible law. Think about it. Most people live their entire lives inside someone else's system, a set of beliefs, structures, and hierarchies designed by minds they'll never meet. They think they're free, but their choices were engineered long before they made them. That's the architect's genius. He doesn't control individuals, he controls reality's framework. He designs the boundaries within which all choices occur. And because his influence is structural, not personal. It becomes untouchable. He doesn't need to win arguments or command respect. His presence is embedded in the rules everyone else is forced to follow. But here's what makes the architect truly dangerous: detachment. He no longer craves visibility. He knows that to be seen is to be vulnerable. So he hides within his creations the system, the structure, the legacy. His power isn't tied to his name. It's tied to his design. And when you reach this level, you understand something profound. You don't need people to remember you if the world still operates on your blueprint. The architect is both visionary and ruthless. He knows that no structure survives without discipline, enforcement, and sacrifice. He builds mechanisms that reward loyalty and punish betrayal automatically, so the system polices itself. He's not interested in temporary influence or personal glory. He's interested in continuity, because true intelligence is not about controlling others. It's about creating something that no one else can destroy. Machiavelli would have recognized this final level as the ultimate evolution of his own philosophy. It's the state beyond fear or love, beyond deception or morality. It's not about being a prince. It's about being the architect of princes. To reach it requires something most can't bear: the death of ego, the willingness to disappear, to let your work outlive your name, to stop seeking to be known and start seeking to be embedded. The fox and the puppeteer crave recognition. The architect craves endurance. He doesn't need to rule. He simply designs the conditions so that whoever rules next still moves inside his architecture. His ideas become laws. His methods become habits. His presence becomes the unseen spine of an era. And once you understand this level, you start to see the lower rungs for what they are. You realize how small the game really was. You see people chasing approval, arguing for validation, clinging to labels while you've moved beyond all of it. Because the architect's greatest act is not creation, it's withdrawal. He withdraws from noise, from identity, from competition. He becomes the quiet hand behind destiny. He doesn't demand power. He designs it. And the world will keep running on his blueprint long after his voice is gone. So now the question is, where are you? Are you still reacting like the pawn? Still parroting borrowed wisdom? Still scheming for quick wins like the fox? Still pulling strings for temporary control like the puppeteer? Or have you started thinking like the architect, building something that will last beyond you? Because once you see this ladder, there's no going back. You can't unsee the truth. You can only choose how high you're willing to climb. You've now seen the 5 levels of intelligence: the pawn, the parrot, the fox, the puppeteer, and the architect. But understanding them isn't enough. The real test begins when you start recognizing where you truly stand, because awareness alone changes everything. Once you see the hierarchy, you begin to notice it everywhere in workplaces, families, politics, friendships, even love. The ladder of intelligence isn't just philosophical, it's psychological. It decides who influences the world and who gets influenced by it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are trapped at the bottom because they never question their programming. They follow trends, moral codes, and social rules not because they believe in them, but because someone else told them it's right. That's level 1. The pawn's world: safe, familiar, and suffocating. But for those who wake up and start to question, a dangerous awareness begins to grow. You start to realize how much of your identity was built for you, not by you. You start seeing how media, family, culture, and fear shape your choices. And the moment you see that, you step onto the next rung. The parrot stage feels like freedom at first. You're learning, consuming, expanding. But soon, it becomes a performance. You speak with borrowed wisdom, not lived truth. And Machiavelli would whisper in your ear, "You have learned to sound wise, but not yet to act wise." This stage seduces many smart people because it feels like progress. It feeds the ego. You're praised for being insightful. You know the right quotes, the right tone, the right books to mention. But deep down, you sense it's hollow. You're collecting feathers, not flight. Real growth requires you to break this addiction to appearances. It demands silence to think your own thoughts. That's where the fox begins to emerge. The fox lives by observation. He studies people instead of arguing with them. He learns patterns instead of chasing approval. He starts to move through life with intention, precision, and calm. If the parrot asks, "What's the right answer?" the fox asks, "What's the real advantage?" And yet, cunning alone can't sustain you forever. The fox lives in tension, always calculating, always watching. He's brilliant but exhausted, because power that depends on deception must be constantly defended. This is where evolution demands a shift, from control to creation, from manipulating people to designing environments. That's the puppeteer's domain. The puppeteer understands that real control doesn't come from force. It comes from structure. He no longer micromanages events. He builds systems that manage themselves. He knows that humans are predictable when their environment is predictable, so he constructs the environment. This level of intelligence is dangerous because the puppeteer begins to taste godhood. He can engineer outcomes without touching the pieces directly, but even here, there's a ceiling. Because while he controls the players, he's still inside someone else's game. His power is immense, but it's still borrowed. He bends the rules, he doesn't write them. The ones who rise beyond this, the ones who stop reacting to the world and start constructing it, become architects. And that's where the real divide begins, between those who build systems and those who are built by them. The architect's power is subtle, but absolute. He no longer needs to manipulate anyone. He creates realities so effective that people willingly follow them, convinced it was their own idea. That's why his presence feels mythical, invisible, yet everywhere. Machiavelli would have admired this level, because the architect no longer asks, "How do I win?" He asks, "How do I design a world where I can't lose?" He doesn't care about temporary control. He builds institutions, movements, or legacies that perpetuate his influence long after he's gone. He disperses his identity across the systems he's created, so even if his name fades, his architecture remains. You can feel the echo of these minds throughout history. You don't see them on camera. They're the ones behind the scripts, the laws, the blueprints, the ideologies that define eras. They are the unseen authors of civilization. And once you recognize their fingerprints, you can never go back to thinking like a pawn or a parrot, because you start to understand something Machiavelli tried to teach. Power is not what you hold in your hands. It's what you build into the walls around you. The pawn fights for survival. The parrot fights for recognition. The fox fights for advantage. The puppeteer fights for control. But the architect, he doesn't fight at all. He designs conditions where fighting becomes irrelevant. That's the final mastery of intelligence. Not reaction, not imitation, not manipulation, but creation. Now, let's bring this down to you here now. Every day, you're revealing where you stand on this ladder. When you conform to opinion, you're the pawn. When you repeat ideas that aren't truly yours, you're the parrot. When you outsmart without building, you're the fox. When you control others but remain dependent on the game, you're the puppeteer. And when you start building structures, habits, systems, ideas that can outlive you, you step into the architect's world. That's the ladder of intelligence. It's not about IQ. It's about awareness. It's about control of self. And above all, it's about creation. Machiavelli once said, The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. The fool waits for clarity. The wise man acts, and clarity follows. You don't climb this ladder by luck. You climb it by decision, by refusing to stay a pawn, by daring to question, to think, to act, to design. And once you rise, you can never descend, because the world below becomes transparent, and you can see every string being pulled, every illusion being sold, every lie people cling to for comfort. The game doesn't end when you see it. It begins. Because once you understand how intelligence evolves, you stop chasing applause and start building empires, not of money, but of mind, not of followers, but of influence, not of control, but of design. So now the question is simple, and it's one Machiavelli himself would have asked. When the game ends and the players fade, will you be remembered as a pawn that obeyed, a parrot that repeated, a fox that schemed, a puppeteer that controlled, or an architect who created the world they all lived in? Choose carefully, because from this moment forward, you can no longer say you didn't know the game existed. You've seen the map. You've seen the rungs. You've seen what intelligence looks like at every level. The only question left is, will you climb? Now that you've seen the 5 levels of intelligence, the pawn, the parrot, the fox, the puppeteer, and the architect, the real question isn't which one you are, it's which one you're becoming. Because these levels aren't permanent. They're states of awareness. And every moment, your thoughts, reactions, and choices decide whether you ascend or fall. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He knew that most people live as pawns because they never realize a game exists. They're too busy reacting to survive. They obey rules written by others, defend beliefs they never examined, and live lives that belong to someone else's plan. They think safety is wisdom, but it's just fear disguised as morality. If you're watching this, you've already cracked that illusion. You've already seen that life is not fair, it's strategic, that the world doesn't reward truth, it rewards leverage. And awareness itself is the first weapon. But awareness alone isn't enough, because the moment you wake up, the temptation begins to perform intelligence instead of embody it. That's the parrot's trap. He collects knowledge like a costume, quoting philosophers to prove he's awake, repeating ideas that were never his. He sounds deep, but every word belongs to someone else. This stage feels good. You feel smarter, sharper, admired. But in reality, you're still dancing for validation. Your voice isn't your own yet, it's borrowed applause. When you grow tired of pretending, when you start caring less about sounding right and more about being effective, you evolve into the fox. The fox sees through illusion. He learns that emotions are leverage, silence is strategy, and perception is currency. He manipulates outcomes not through force, but through anticipation. He moves quietly, letting others reveal their motives. And when he strikes, it's clean, precise, final. But even cunning has limits. Clever men win battles, not empires. The fox's brilliance is reactive, built on reading others, not rewriting the game itself. He's trapped in the endless tension of control. He doesn't rest, he calculates. And eventually, he realizes, power that depends on constant manipulation is fragile. So he stops chasing control and starts designing systems of control. That's when the fox transforms into the puppeteer. The puppeteer understands structure. He doesn't dominate individuals. He builds frameworks that dominate by themselves. He creates conditions where people act exactly as he wants, while believing it was their choice. That's real control, invisible, voluntary, self-sustaining. He whispers instead of commands. He engineers consequences instead of arguments. And through patience, timing, and narrative, he moves entire groups without leaving fingerprints. Yet even this intelligence has a flaw. The puppeteer is still inside the system he manipulates. He's brilliant, but bound tangled in the same web he created. He builds influence that collapses if he stops watching. And that's not power. That's dependency disguised as mastery. To transcend that, one must build something that no longer needs them. That's the birth of the architect. The architect doesn't just play within systems, he creates them. His intelligence is generational. He disperses his identity into his designs, embedding his influence into the rules of how others live, think, and build. He doesn't need followers or credit. He needs endurance. He understands that power tied to a single name dies when the name fades. So he hides within the structures themselves, traditions, laws, organizations, technologies. He becomes invisible, yet everywhere. He doesn't manipulate individuals. He defines reality. That's the highest level of intelligence, to create something that outlasts your existence. To be gone yet still in control. And to reach it, you must let go of everything the lower levels cling to. Recognition, approval, ego. You must stop needing to be seen as powerful, and instead become the structure others depend on. The architect isn't admired. He's felt. His silence becomes order. His absence becomes legacy. Now look at your life, your thoughts, your reactions, your ambitions. They reveal exactly where you stand on this ladder. When you obey without thinking, you're the pawn. When you repeat what others believe, you're the parrot. When you outsmart but never build, you're the fox. When you control others but not the system itself, you're the puppeteer. And when you start creating frameworks, habits, structures, philosophies that outlive you, you step into the architect's realm. Every level has a price. The pawn sacrifices awareness. The parrot sacrifices originality. The fox sacrifices peace. The puppeteer sacrifices trust. But the architect sacrifices self. He dies to his ego so his vision can live forever. That's the highest intelligence. The courage to vanish and let your design speak for you. So before this ends, make a choice. Don't just watch. Don't just agree. Decide to climb. Write it in the comments right now. I will rise. Say it to yourself, quietly, but with certainty. Because the moment you declare it, you stop being a piece and start becoming the player. The pawn obeys. The parrot imitates. The fox schemes. The puppeteer manipulates. But the architect, he creates the world they all live in. And once you've seen that truth, you can never go back. The game is real. It's already begun. And now so have you.